Time to take a look at your money here on Good Morning Quad Cities, starting with your weekly stock market recap. The S&P 500 is up 0.3%, NASDAQ up 0.1%, and Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.3%. And Andrew is still tracking that other round of heat, but we are going to start with your money. Over the past 15 months, the U.S. Federal Reserve has pushed interest rates to a 43-year high, and as a result, consumers have seen interest rates soar on their credit cards, auto loans, home mortgages, many other forms of consumer debt. But why is the Federal Reserve doing this, and how does this process actually work? So joining us now is financial advisor Mark Ravicheski, joining us to talk about this. Good morning, Mark.
Morning to you. Great to see you again, David.
Good to see you as well. So what exactly is the Federal Reserve? What does it do?
Well, understandably, David, the U.S. Federal Reserve is probably not the conversation of choice, at the family dinner table or around the office water cooler. But the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, as it's called, does play a critical role in kind of helping us navigate through this inflation. The Fed is often called the bank for banks. In other words, it helps facilitate many of those operations your local banks engages into, to ensure the overall banking system runs efficiently and smoothly. But the Fed also serves as the decision-making body for U.S. monetary policy. By manipulating the amount of money in the economy and interest rates, it tries to influence spending, employment, and inflation to promote a healthy economy.
So why is the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, and how does it go about doing that?
Inflation has declined from that, remember, that 40-year high of 8.9% we had back in June of last year to its current level of 4.9%. But remember, David, any inflation, above that 2% is deemed excessive and causes undue pain on consumers, businesses, and ultimately the U.S. economy. So to help keep inflation under control, the Fed raises what's called the benchmark Fed funds rate. And the Fed funds rate serves as a basis for many forms of consumer debt. And by raising that Fed funds rate, the Fed seeks to essentially disincentivize people buying goods and services on credit. You're now going to be charged a much higher interest rate to borrow money on your credit card, your bank loans, auto loans, home mortgages. And the Fed's goal essentially is to gently tap the brakes on consumer spending. If there's less consumer spending, ideally, inflation should start to decline.
Yeah, but raising those interest rates also inflicts a lot of pain on consumers. Home mortgages shot up to 7%, credit cards up over 20%. So why would the Federal Reserve raise those interest rates when many of us are already struggling to make ends meet?
Look, David, the Federal Reserve finds itself in a very, very unenviable position. On one hand, it didn't create this high inflation, but on the other hand, as part of its mandate, it's tasked with trying to get this inflation under control. Now, since March of last year, the Fed has raised that Fed funds rate from near 0% to its current level, between 5 and 5.25%. And that's been the most aggressive pace of interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, going all the way back to 1980. Now, the Federal Reserve, it does acknowledge the pain that these high interest rates are having on consumers. But the Fed says, look, the pain felt by consumers would be much, much greater by allowing this high inflation to continue than the pain caused by these high and rising interest rates.
Well, the Federal Reserve is also holding its next meeting this coming Wednesday. Do you think the Fed's done raising their interest rates, or could we see additional hikes this year?
Oh, boy, that's the million-dollar question right there. Look, the Fed, first things first, the Fed isn't expected to raise the Fed funds rate on Wednesday, but overall, Wall Street does expect another quarter-point rate hike at either its July or September meeting, and then announce what you could consider a pause on future rate hikes. But boy, the second half of this year, though, David, is so extremely cloudy in trying to predict what the Fed might do. What happens to inflation? Does the economy go into a recession? If so, will it be short and mild? Will it be longer and much more severe? So the Fed could quickly find itself having to either implement additional rate hikes, or it could be forced to start lowering interest rates if we do go into a very severe recession. So a lot of it's going to be determined on how this economic data plays out over the second half of this year.
A lot of things to keep an eye on. Thank
Yeah.
you so, Mark. And thank you so much, Mark. And we will see you again next Monday.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your week, David. Good to see you again.
You too. Thank you. And here's a look at what's coming up on GMA.
In this morning's